Good evening, brothers, and welcome to our Connect session. It's been a while since we've been together, but it's so good. We thank you for joining us tonight. We do have a great presentation that focuses strictly on us men. We've been through some serious challenges this past year, but we've managed by God's grace to continue to provide for our families and friends, even our church and our community. So I want to talk a little bit tonight about mental health. The notion of mental health has long been covered in shame and embarrassment for the black community. And heaven forbid, if a family member is actually diagnosed with a mental illness, it's often assumed that the entire family may be a little cray-cray. But there's a misunderstanding of what mental health actually is. To reduce the stigma, we must bring about awareness, education, and acceptance of mental health. It's real. And there are many reasons that people, won't seek or reluctant to seek therapy and counseling. Most of us prefer religion as our primary way of coping with mental health issues. But I would encourage you, do not suffer in silence. As I said, this past year, you may have got furloughed from a job, you may have lost a loved one, had to bury them, a broken relationship. You may have suffered from anger or abuse or abandonment. May even have some type of addiction that you're dealing with. We've all experienced something this past year, but God, by His grace, has allowed us to still be here. So tonight, we're blessed to have Pastor Cedric Jackson. He's our guest speaker. He will give us some much needed advice about coping with mental issues such as anxiety, depression, loneliness, the loss of a loved one. Dr. Jackson will offer his considerable expertise to us that will better equip us to deal with mental issues. The next voice you'll hear will be that of our guest speaker, Cedric Von Jackson.
Greetings to the men of Brown Missionary Baptist Church. My name is Pastor Cedric Von Jackson of the Askew Grove Baptist Church. And I want to thank you for joining me tonight for this discussion, Getting My Mind Right, a mental health discussion for brothers. First of all, I'd like to share a little bit about my own personal story. About 7 years ago, I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder and anxiety. My job was a very high-stress job at the time, and I noticed that there were mornings that every morning I got up, I was dreading going to work. Just about every morning, before I left the house, I would pray with my wife, and in the middle of the prayer, I would break down and cry. I'm in the school profession, and most days of that first semester, before I started seeking help, there was not a morning that I did not contemplate taking my life. I was driving down Interstate 55. That was my route to work every morning. And there was not a morning that I did not envision myself driving off the embankment and taking my life. When I spoke to my own personal pastor, I am a pastor, but when I spoke to my own personal pastor and told him the things that I was going through and how I was experiencing some characteristics of depression, he looked at me and he calls me Sid. He said, "No, Sid, really not you. You're the one that seems to always have all your stuff together." And what we know about people who live with and suffer from depressive disorders is that we do a really good job, as the poet Paul Lawrence Dunbar says, we do a really good job of wearing the masks. And so the reason my pastor could look at me and say, question whether or not I was actually living with a depressive disorder was because I had done such a great job of wearing the mask. I was fortunate enough to have family and friends around me who knew the signs of depression and who were loving enough to point me in the right direction. And so I can say that 7 years later now, I am still living with depression. At one time, I was seeing a counselor, a therapist, and I was on 2 different medications, one trazodone for anxiety and another Paxil for the depression. I can say today that the Lord has made it so that I'm down to 1 medicine. But I remember my first experience with my anxiety and my depression, and it just really felt like the walls were closing in on me. I remember with great fear and trepidation even, that time when it felt like everything I touched was failing, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me. But I'm using this mess of mine as a ministry. And that's why I do the work in mental health that I do. I'm not a mental health expert. I'm just one that lives with a mental health concern, and I'm concerned about other brothers like some of you may be suffering with depression, anxiety, or any other host of mental health concerns. And so again, thank you so much for listening to my story and joining in this conversation tonight. I would like to let you know that depending on what study you read, anywhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 people in this country will experience at least one mental health episode this calendar year, 2021. That's 20 to 25% of the American population will experience some sort of mental health concern. And if we bring that conversation to church, if we bring those numbers to church, in a church about the size of 50, that's between 10 and 12 individuals that will face some mental health challenge. If you move up to a church the size of 100, that number goes up to between 20 and 25. A church like Brown that has over 10,000 members, we're looking at least 2,500 people, 2,500 members of Brown Missionary Baptist Church this year will experience some sort of mental health concern. And the question is, well, how many is too many? Well, one is too many, and that's why the church has to become more diligent, why the church has to become more purposeful in talking about mental health concerns like depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, and why the church has to create safe spaces in which people can share their stories and their testimonies, because I truly believe that as a pastor and as a believer, I believe the book of Revelation, I believe the Bible where it says that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimonies. Thinking about more statistics in mental health, African Americans are 20% more likely to experience some sort of psychological distress. That's 20% more likely to experience some psychological distress than our white counterparts. Suicide rates, in particular among African American men, suicide rates in African American men, we are 4 times more likely to take our lives by suicide than are our sisters, our African American women. And so this problem, this issue of mental illness, mental health concerns, this is a major issue in our communities and in our churches. And unless we do more, unless we make more open spaces for people to receive the help that they need, unless we do more work to stamp out the stigma against mental illness, our people will continue to suffer and die. There's a book called Troubled Minds, Mental Illness and the Church's Mission. It's by a lady by the name of Amy Simpson. And Amy Simpson states that mental illness is one of the church's best kept secrets. Mental illness is one of the church's best kept secrets. Now, a major reason that this is such a big secret in our church and in our communities is because of this word stigma. Stigma is a mark of disgrace, or the negative attitudes and opinions that surround mental illness. So again, that's stigma, a mark of disgrace, or the negative attitudes and opinions about mental health and a mental illness. And stigma is very damaging to those who might seek help otherwise in several different ways. First of all, stigma makes people avoid seeking the help that they need for their mental health concerns. Additionally, the stigma against mental illness helps others view those who live with mental illness as weak, or in particular in the church as those who are lacking in faith. And nobody wants to be seen as weak. No one wants to be seen as having a lack of faith. And the church's response, hear me well, Brown, the church's response has typically been, let's just pray about it. Or you don't have enough faith. You need to increase your faith. Or the church looks at it from the standpoint of mental illness, depression, whichever malady you may have. The church looks at it as the result of someone's sin or maybe the result of demonic activity. And while as a pastor, I have to believe that prayer is a part of a treatment plan for mental illness, I also understand from my own personal story that prayer cannot be the only treatment plan. Let me say that again. As a pastor, I believe in the power of prayer. And so as one who lives with a mental health concern, I have to believe that prayer is a part of a treatment plan for mental illness, but it cannot be the only treatment plan for mental illness. Let's look at how mental illness compares to another illness and how we in the church deal with it. Let's think about cancer. In 2018, there was an estimated 1.7 million new cases of cancer that were diagnosed in the United States. That's less than 1% of the United States population in 2018 was diagnosed with cancer, some form of cancer, any form. And actually, it's not just less than 1%, it's 0.53%. Now, let's compare the 0.53%, less than 1%, let's compare that to the 20 to 25% of Americans who experience mental health challenges each year. So again, we compare 1.7 million new cancer cases and diagnoses to 65 to 81 million patients with mental health challenges. But mental illness is the biggest secret, the best kept secret in the church. Research has consistently shown that the church and clergy members, preachers and pastors in the church, not psychologists, not other mental health professionals, but the church, preachers and other clergy members are the most common source of help sought in times of psychological distress. And here are some ways that the churches have responded, right? So the church is the main course of action where people turn for help. But in 2008, there's a researcher by the name of Dr. Matthew Stanford. In Stanford, he's the professor of graduate studies in psychology and neuroscience at Baylor University. He conducted a study in 2008, and he asked the subjects of his study 4 basic questions. Those questions were, number 1, did anyone at your church ever suggest that you did not have a real mental illness, even though a mental health professional had diagnosed you with one? The second question was, did anyone at your church ever suggest to you that you should stop taking your psychiatric medication for treatment for your mental illness? The third question was, did anyone at your church ever suggest to you that your mental illness was a result of your personal sin? And then the fourth and final question asked in the study was, did anyone at your church ever suggest that your mental illness was the result of demonic activity? The results to this study were shocking. At least they were to me. For the first question, did anyone ever suggest that you didn't have a real mental illness? 37.6% of the respondents said yes, and the person that told me that was my pastor. The second question, did anyone ever suggest that you stop taking your medication for your mental illness? 20% said yes, and that person was my pastor. The third question, did anyone at your church ever suggest to you that your mental illness was a result of your personal sin? And so we think about the man who was born blind. Who did sin? This man or his parents that he was born blind? To that question, 42.4% of the respondents said, yes, I've been told that, and my pastor was the one who told me. The final question, did anyone at your church ever suggest to you that your mental illness was a result of demonic activity? 31.7% said yes, and it was my pastor. And so we as pastors And I'm glad that Brown has a loving and caring pastor like Pastor Orr, who understands the importance of opening up the conversation about mental health and mental illnesses. But we as pastors and we as churches have to do a better job of understanding and opening up the conversations so that our brothers and sisters can get the help that they need. So, my condition is depression, major depressive disorder, and anxiety. And what I want to do now is I want to look at some instances of how depression, or actually one instance, of how depression shows up in the biblical text. Because I believe that one of the ways that we fight the stigma against mental illness, brothers, in the church is that we learn to identify how these situations show up in the Bible, because as believers in the Word of God, if we can see how our biblical heroes suffered from the same conditions that we suffer with, then maybe we would be more likely to seek the help that we need. Because what happens in the Bible is that God takes flawed individuals, God takes individuals who have illnesses and sicknesses, and in spite of those illnesses, in spite of those sicknesses, in spite of those flaws, God still finds a way to use those individuals for and to the glory of God. So when I talk about depression, there are some things, first of all, I want us to understand. First of all, depression is more than just feeling sad a day or two. Depression is more than just feeling sad a day or two. Depression is actually measured over a length of time, not just a day or two of feeling sad. For people who live with depression, sometimes talking about it is not enough. There have to be, for some people, other avenues that they seek outside of just counseling and therapy. What we also need to understand is that depression is no respecter of persons. Depression can affect anyone, regardless of age, race, sex, gender, nationality. Depression can affect anyone at any time. Also, in particular for African Americans, getting help can be difficult because, one, we don't always have professionals that look like us in the field that we feel can relate to us. Another reason that we find difficulty in getting help is because of this stigma against mental illness. We don't want to appear weak. We don't want to be labeled as crazy. And so getting help may be difficult. We also understand, and we need people to understand, that there are many treatments to depression. Therapy is not the one answer. Medicine is not the one answer. Sometimes it takes a combination of both, but there are many options to treating depression. People who have depression do not choose to have depression. And so for us to say to a person who's living with depression, why don't you look on the bright side? Why don't you just snap out of it? Why would you want to take your life? You have so much to live for. People who live with depression do not choose it. Trust me, if I had a choice, I would not have it. And finally, we need to understand that depression is not a sign of weakness, nor is it a sign of a lack of faith. So, what are the characteristics of depression? There's a manual called the DSM-5. It is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual version 5, and it lists every mental health issue that you could ever consider, over 200. Depression is defined as having an extended period of a depressed mood, showing weight loss, severe weight loss, extreme weight loss, or a decrease in appetite, showing extreme insomnia, having psychomotor retardation. We call this losing the activity of our limbs in the church, right? Experiencing fatigue or loss of energy, experiencing feelings of worthlessness, having a diminished ability to concentrate or think, or showing indecisiveness when it's time for us to make a decision. And finally, having recurrent thoughts of death or suicide. And like I said, one of the reasons we don't recognize depression in our own lives is because we've not been taught and trained to recognize depression in the biblical text. But there are actually characters in the Bible, heroes in the Bible, that exhibit characteristics of depression, major depressive disorders. And my favorite individual in the Bible to look at as an example of one who lives with depression is King David. Yes, that King David. David, who is the man after God's own heart, who slayed the giant Goliath, who fought the bear and the lion with his bare hands. That David exhibited characteristics of depressive disorder. So we look to the biblical text. Extended periods of depressed mood. In Psalm 6, verses 6 and 7, David says, I am weary with my moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with my weeping. So he shows an extended period of a depressed mood. And there are other locations where this characteristic shows up. I'm just giving you one scriptural example for each characteristic. David experiences weight loss and loss in appetite, or decrease in his appetite. In Psalm 109, verse 24, David says, my knees are weak through fasting. My body has become gaunt. And gaunt, we know from the vision that Joseph has about the cows, the thin cows, the gaunt cows that eat up the fat cows. This is a skinny condition where you're so skinny, you've lost so much weight that you can actually see your rib cage through your skin. So that's what David looks like because he's had a loss of appetite and he's lost so much weight. David experiences insomnia. In Psalm 22, verse 2, he says, oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and night by night, but I find no rest. In that same psalm, David starts out that psalm by saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Right? That's Psalm 22, where David experiences insomnia. He experiences psychomotor retardation, he loses the ability of his limbs. Psalm 55, verse 5 says that fear and trembling come upon me, and horror overwhelms me. In other words, the fear and trembling that David is talking about, this is the shakes that he has where he can't control his hands and his arms and all of his body parts. David talks about experiencing fatigue and a loss of energy. Psalm 38, verse 10, he says, my heart throbs, my strength fails me. As for the light of my eyes, it also has gone from me. Feelings of worthlessness. David says in Psalm 22, verse 6, but I am a worm, not a human, scorned by others and despised by the people. He's feeling worthless. He has a diminished ability to think or concentrate or show decisiveness. David shows great indecisiveness. And we know the story about David when David first sees Bathsheba. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1, the text says that in the spring of the year, the time when kings go off into battle, David sent Joab and his officers and all of Israel with him. They ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem. And what we understand about this episode in David's life is that his depression has taken such a hold on him that he shirks the kingly responsibility that he would normally have. He doesn't take his kingly responsibility seriously. He does not go into battle with the rest of his men the way a normal king would because he's so gripped with depression. And then finally, David exhibits some recurrent thoughts of death or even suicide. Going back again to Psalm 22, verse 15, David says, my mouth is dried up like a potsherd. My tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me down in the dust of death. And so in that psalm, David has experienced so much grief and anguish that he literally feels that God is slaying him, that God is killing him and laying his body down in the dirt for him to die. So again, the reason I'm going through all of this is because we need to be able to see in the biblical text, brothers, how depression shows up in the Bible. But we don't want to leave it with just that piece about how depression shows up in the Bible. We want to understand that in spite of the depression, in spite of the mental illness, in spite of the mental health concern that's exhibited through this biblical character, God still used that person for the glory of God. And so if any of our brothers out there right now are living with major depressive disorder, or you're experiencing symptoms of depression, I use my own story as an example, and I use the story of David, and there are others in the biblical text. Elijah, when he was on the run from King Ahab and Jezebel, how Elijah went to the mountainside and he sat down and he prayed to God, and he ruled the day that he was born. He prayed to God, please just take my life so that I will not fall into the hands of my adversaries, right? So Elijah shows signs of depression and thoughts of suicide, thoughts of dying. And so if God can use individuals like David, if God can use individuals like Elijah and any other character in the Bible that exhibits a major depressive disorder or the characteristics of that disorder, then God can certainly use our brothers that are tuning in tonight and watching this presentation. So be encouraged, brothers. Hold on. You are not alone. That's one of the things that people who live with depression want to know, that they are not in this by themselves. I would be remiss tonight, I think, if I did not mention some ways in which you can actually help yourself through a depressive disorder, how you can help yourself through having these characteristics, having these symptoms. Now, of course, what worked for me was counseling, prayer, and medication. Counseling, prayer, and medication. And I am a strong advocate of all of that. Counseling, prayer, medication. You can go to a bookstore and read for yourself. I just recently started reading a book on a process called cognitive behavior therapy. And all that is retraining ourselves, retraining our minds to think about our situations differently. That we learn how to call into captivity every negative thought that lifts itself against the knowledge of God. And so cognitive behavior therapy may be something that you want to look into and read up on for yourself. But I want to give you some strategies for fighting depression and major depressive disorder. And actually, a lot of you probably already know many of the strategies I'm about to mention to you. Because what we find in the mental health field is that a lot of strategies that we use for our mental health actually apply and are beneficial to our physical health as well. So I'm just going to run through some of these and give you some suggestions for the things that you can do. Something that will benefit both your physical health and your mental health is, one, make sure that you get enough sleep. Make sure that you get enough sleep. The nighttime is the right time, in Ray Charles's words. The nighttime is the right time for our brains and our bodies to rejuvenate themselves and to replenish themselves. Make sure that you get a good night's sleep. One of the things that you can do is train yourself that the bed is for sleeping. The bed is for sleeping. Now, I know a lot of us like to sit up and read in the bed at night, or we like to sit up and watch television at night in bed, but that's actually not healthy. What you do is you train your body to understand that this bed, this piece of furniture is for my sleep and my rest. Make sure a lot of us take our cell phones and other digital devices into the bedroom with us. Well, cell phones give off what they call ambient light. And that keeps you awake at night, and it keeps you from getting into that deep REM sleep mode that is best for replenishing and refreshing your body. Research says that anywhere from, so we think, well, get enough sleep. That's 8 hours of sleep a night. Well, that actually depends on you and your body type. But what research says is anywhere from 6.5 to 9 hours of sleep every night. 6.5 is the lower extremity. Anything under 6.5 hours, you're not getting a quality night's sleep. I don't care who you think you are. I don't care how Superman you think you are, and you can get by with 5 hours. You are not your best self if you're only getting 5 hours of sleep. At least 6.5 up to 9 hours of sleep a night. Another tactic, another strategy for helping yourself, through a depressive disorder or any mental disorder, and that's beneficial to your body, is eating for mental health. Eating for mental health. Put plain and simple, watch your diet. The other night I had a conversation with the brothers, and I made mention that if you read the label that's on your food and you can't pronounce the word or you can't remember how to spell it, then it's probably not good for your health, right? You want to make sure that you eat lots of fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables. You want to eat lots of legumes. You want to eat lots of healthy carbohydrates, not unhealthy carbohydrates. So cut out the white bread and replace it with wheat bread, whole grains, nuts, lean meat that is full of protein, lots of fish. If you've done any kind of research, then you'll know that this sounds a lot like what they call the Mediterranean diet. That's a good diet for you to be on. So get enough sleep. Make sure you eat healthy. Exercise. Exercise does your physical body good, and it does your mental health and mental status good as well. Because exercise does a few things. First of all, exercise releases the feel-good hormone in our body called, oh my goodness, I just went blank. I can't call it up. But anyway, there's a feel-good hormone in our body. It's going to come back to you in a minute. But there's a feel-good hormone in your body that is released when you exercise. Exercise gives you a jolt of energy and feeling good. And when you exercise, you also feel a sense of accomplishment, right? You feel a sense of accomplishment knowing that you've done something for your physical health and your mental health. Endorphins, that's the word I was trying to think of. So your exercising releases endorphins. So try to get 30 minutes in a day. If not 30 minutes a day, start slow. 30 minutes 2 or 3 times a week. But the most important thing is to get your body moving. Manage your stress. Manage your stress. There's no way you can get rid of all of your stress. A lot of us work stressful jobs. A lot of us work high demand jobs. So there's no way that you can get rid of your stress, but you learn to manage your stress by avoiding people that are stress-inducing people, by not biting off more than you can chew, by giving yourself the grace not to be perfectionists. A lot of times we bring stress upon ourselves by making ourselves into perfectionists, and that's not healthy for us. Another tactic, another strategy, spend time outside. Spend time outside, soaking in God's sunshine, soaking in that fresh air. Sunshine has vitamin D in it, which is good for your mental health. So spend as much time as you can outside. There's a reason the psalmist says in Psalm 19 that the heavens are declaring the glory of God, that we spend time in nature, enjoying God's creation, enjoying all of the majesty of God's creation, and it's got health benefits as well. Something that doesn't occur to everyone, but when you start to feel down, serve other people, volunteer, help others. Because what volunteering does and serving others does is it takes your mind off of the issues that you're dealing with for that time being. Now, the issues may be there when you get finished volunteering, but at least for a while, you have done the Christian thing. You have done the thing that makes you a wonderful member of the body of Christ. You have looked after the needs of others instead of looking after your own needs. And there's something about volunteering and helping others that makes us feel accomplishment, that makes us feel like we are doing something for our God. And then the final piece that I'd like to leave with you is practice gratitude. Practice gratitude. Learn how to be thankful and to give thanks. At the close of every day, as you are getting ready to get in bed, which is, again, just for sleeping. But as you close your day, think about 5 things that happened that day that you are grateful for, and just say, thank you, God, for these 5 things. Thank you for the little boy that came up to me and told me how much he was encouraged by what I do. Thank you for a loving wife, a spouse that cooks a meal for me. Thank you for my beautiful children who are doing the very best that they can. Thank you for just life, health, and strength. Thank you for having a job that I can go to, that I enjoy, that I can provide for my family. Find reasons and ways to show gratitude. Now, all of these are self-help techniques. These are things that you can do for yourself. And a lot of these you already know. And so if you put these things into practice, you are already on the road to getting the help, the self-help that you need in order to fight against depression. But again, not all of these things work for every person. So there may come a time when you have to seek help from someone else. Pastor Orr has a wonderful ministry here. I know that there are people on the staff that are on standby to talk to you, to help you through your issues, just to provide a listening ear and a leaning shoulder. I know that this church has those wonderful resources, but even sometimes those resources may not be enough. And sometimes there may come a time when you have to seek professional counseling, and it is okay. It is okay if you have to get on medication, even if just for a little while, or if you have to remain on it for a long, extended period of time. That's okay too. We have to give ourselves the permission to tell ourselves that it is okay not to be okay. And brothers, again, remember, you are not in this by yourself. There are others who are going through some of the same battles and same struggles that you go through, that you may currently face, or that may come upon you in the near future. So, no matter what you do, never try to tackle this giant on your own. There are always others out there who are ready and willing to listen to you. And I want to encourage Brown and the membership and the men's ministry to continue creating safe spaces where the brothers can come together and share their stories, their testimonies, because what testimony does is it reminds us that we're not in this by ourselves, and it also informs us that the same God who brought my brother through is able to bring me through a similar situation. Thank you so much for inviting me and listening for this time together. I've enjoyed my time with you tonight. I pray God's blessings over your lives. We are in this together. You are not alone. It is okay to not be okay. Y'all go in the blessings of our God, and I hope to see you again one day soon. Thank you again.
Thank you, Pastor Jackson. We owe you a great debt for your insight and advice about facing our mental challenges. We realize that many of you men will have comments or questions about this session. So next time we will have a panel of brothers talking about the challenges that we all have faced, especially over the past year. In the meantime, if you would like to leave a comment or questions, text BMBC Men to 31996. Tune in next. Okay.
Yeah, you can just pick up from
Okay. Tune in next time to watch the discussion. Thank you for tuning in, and we will look forward to sharing with you on our next session.